Hello, how are you all doing? Today I have a very special guest with me, Heather, and I got to speak with her a few days ago. And the discussion that I had with her was an eye opener for me. There were so many things that I got to understand and realize we see around in the world, but we don't pay attention to them just because it didn't happen to us. Uh, Trauma is something like that. We may think or we may believe that when we sympathize with other people or when we empathize with them, that we understand their pain, but only the people who go through it know what that pain feels like, right? So if somebody goes through a roadside accident and loses a limb, they lose a part of their body. You know, no matter what we say or do or believe, we cannot feel that pain. Only they know how they feel. When floods happen, earthquakes happen, and you lose a loved one, or in a school shooting, no matter how sad we feel, there's no way we can understand that pain, right? And so the guest here today, how she opened my eyes was that my mother, about my sister, the pain they went through. And I never understood it because their pain was something that we could not see. It was not something that existed yet. It was not out there in the world for us to see or for us to mourn. Okay. And that is loss of a child in utero, a miscarriage, an abortion, a stillbirth. This is just because it happens to many women or it's common, it doesn't mean that it's not there. And just because that child never came into the world and never saw that child, we never touched that child, we never felt that child, the mother who had the child, she felt the heartbeat of that child. And there is no way for me to understand that. The three siblings that I could have had, which I lost, I don't feel that pain. And it never occurred to me to understand what pain my mother would have gone through till I spoke to Heather. My sister, when she went through it, she had a miscarriage. It was a very early pregnancy miscarriage, 5 weeks. But even then, we look at miscarriage or abortions and stuff. Okay, it happens. Okay, it's God's will. You can try again. You're young. It's okay. No. And so today's episode is actually a testimony. It's in honor of these women, in honor of those families. We talk about women, but we never even get to ask those fathers how they feel. They lose this child who never even came into this world. So my very beautiful Heather here with me. Share with us your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I feel like we're already like besties, even though we just met.
Same here, same here. It's a beautiful connection, that vibe that we have.
It is. I wish we lived closer. I will say
you can always come here. I can always come to you.
Okay, I'll hop on a plane. Let's have coffee tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I will say about 2-3 years ago, I was not able to say my story without having anxiety, without crying. So it's just literally within the last year that I've really found some healing. I can smile through my story a little bit more, whereas before I get a little choked up. But my story starts 18 years ago. So it's literally taken me up until now to really tell my story. So I will say that growing up, we had what I like to call the all-American family. we ate dinner together as a family. We watched Wheel of Fortune every night at 6:30. We were a close-knit family. I didn't have any trauma as a child. We didn't have, any alcoholism, any kind of abuse, whether it be mental, physical, emotional.
So you had
So,
a perfect family, for perfect childhood.
I mean, from my perspective, I thought we had in my mind, I had a good life,
You were privileged.
and
You were the lucky one.
uh, yes, yes. And my parents owned their own business, so they were entrepreneurs, and I would go to we just were a very, very, close family. And when I was 19 years old, I moved out of the house. So my parents, were a little upset about that one, but I moved across state to be with basically my high school sweetheart. We got married a couple years later, and after you get married, you're in your young 20s. The next natural step would be, let's have a
Have a
baby.
family. Yeah.
We had secure jobs. I did not go to college, but I started out in the, corporate world as a backup receptionist. I'm like, I'm just going to climb up the corporate ladder. So we had really good jobs, and we had money saved up. So it was like, this is a
Everything
perfect
was
time. Oh
going
yeah,
well according to plan.
absolutely. And I am a type A personality planner organizer. So I'm like, this is easy, check, check, check.
Mm.
I got pregnant within a month of trying. I'm like, dang, this is like,
This is easy. This is easy.
and life is good. So by 6 months, I had the nursery decorated, name picked out. I'm like, let's do this. Super excited. I just remember being, that the pregnancy glow that they talk about, it was pretty much on my face 24/7 for the first, uh, 7 months. And 2 weeks before my due date, I had my baby shower. And, again, baby showers, I've never seen anybody not smile and not be happy at a baby shower. It was just one of those days, everything went perfect. And that was on a Saturday. I went on Monday for my 38th week checkup. And that's when they could not find a heartbeat. And they said, well, let's do an ultrasound. Maybe the baby is in an odd position. It's not uncommon to not be able to locate the heartbeat. So I went to down the hallway into the ultrasound room, and my doctor was in there, which is kind of strange because usually you have like the ultrasound tech, but clearly this was a little more serious. So he was in there, and he did an ultrasound, and at that moment, my life changed. And where the black circle is, where you usually see the heartbeat, there was no longer a flicker of a heartbeat. He had passed away.
Did you not feel before, like maybe anything different, maybe the child not moving? I mean, the baby not
Right.
moving?
Right. So he had asked me that. He had said, when's the last time you felt your baby move?
Mm.
And that's, I think what they always ask. And I thought about it, and I said, well, he had the hiccups, which is always, when you're pregnant, that's like the cutest thing ever. I said he had the hiccups Saturday night, but then I didn't feel him Sunday. And there had been days where I didn't feel him move all the time or kick all the time. So I didn't think anything of it. It's not like I hadn't felt him for a week or 2 weeks. It was literally within maybe a 24-hour period. And I was like, and this was, my appointment was Monday afternoon. I said, I felt hiccups Saturday night. So somewhere in between that, he had
Something
passed.
happened. And something happened, and you were not aware, and nothing apparent had happened, like physically had happened to you.
No, I mean, it was like complete shock, numbness. I was not prepared at all for that news. I mean, we had just had the baby shower. We had just eaten cake and measured my tummy with the cute baby shower games that you do. And so yeah, my doctor is still my doctor after 20 years. I still go to him, and he was just very compassionate, very sweet. And he's like, I'm so sorry and he said, we'll do some tests and figure out, what happened. And he said, you will need to, we'll need to induce you. You will need to deliver your baby. And at that point, you're just going through the motions. I didn't break down in tears. I did obviously shed some tears, but it was more at that point, you're going through the motions. I'm like, I don't even know if I have a hospital bag. Like, I know you're supposed to have it in your trunk at this time. At that point, I was like, I don't even. So they sent me to a hospital room. I get my hospital gown on. We start having to call family members. Like, how do you even
tell them? What do you tell them?
Right. And I remember wanting to call my mom. She lived, they were still across state, and she was not home. So I had to call my grandma. I don't know about your grandma, but my grandma she's now in heaven, but she had the sweetest voice. I couldn't, when she said hello on the end of the phone, I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it. And I remember handing it to my husband, and he ended up breaking the news. And the next thing I know, there's a hospital room full of family. I think one coworker was in there. She was a close friend of mine. Family was driving from across state. I remember 10 people in the room, and they had induced me, and I was going into labor, having contractions. I remember having contractions and wanting them to leave because I'm in labor. I'm shocked. I'm stunned. I'm again going through the motions, but all these people were just staring at me because they don't know what to say. They want to be there for support. And all I remember is me laying in the bed and looking out at all these people staring at me while I'm in the middle of a contraction.
That's strange, just to hear that, like, so they had men and women, everybody in that room while they were inducing you?
Well, they had induced me, and of course, it takes 2, 3, 4 hours for it to kick in.
Okay.
And, the contractions weren't so bad that I was, but it was to the point you're like, oh, that hurts, to where I probably would have wanted them to all leave because, here I am curling my toes, so not to show them that I'm in pain, because I already don't like attention and all eyes on me. And then here you are in a very, very vulnerable state. I think the most vulnerable state I could ever be in, and all these people. So it was very hard because I knew they were there. They loved me. They supported me. But in another sense, I was like, please get out. Like, please get out. So by then my parents came, and then there was more people in there. And I think at that point, my mom was like, okay, everybody go to the waiting room.
Only moms can understand that. Yes.
Oh yeah. And at that point,
it gives me goosebumps, although I'm listening to the story the second time. It's still giving me those goosebumps.
And, anytime we go through a trauma, even if it happened 18 years ago, I can, it's very vivid. I think I will remember that day until the day I die. It's so vivid. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day. We just don't forget those things. And I did end up delivering him. What they didn't tell me and didn't warn me was, when you deliver a healthy baby, they lay them on your chest for that skin to skin contact. Well, I guess they do that when your baby didn't make it. So I didn't see that coming, and I delivered him, and they laid.
I hope they don't do that anymore. I don't know.
I don't know what, and I understand they're having to clean up things, I totally get, all that. But not only am I already in shock and numb and going through the motions, then I have my baby who has passed away. He was 38 weeks along, which means he was pretty much full term. He was 5 pounds, had curly hair. He looked perfect, like nothing on the outside was wrong.
Yes.
It looked like he was just sleeping.
Yeah.
And so they, it's almost like I did this, when they lay him on you, you're used to, cradling them. I was like, what am I supposed to hold him? Like, what am I,
Yeah.
Now when all this happened, I was 24. So I was still, young 20s. I didn't even know this thing actually happened. I didn't know women had stillborn babies. It's just nothing my family taught me. Society hadn't taught me. It was all very foreign, very new. And I ended up holding him. They cleaned him up. They wrapped him in a blanket, and I held him for 2 hours. And I knew when I gave him up, that was going to be the last that I would see of him. And I remember holding his pinky, and, we did open his eyelids to see what color eyes he had. Again, he
God.
looked like just a baby sleeping.
Hmm.
And 2 days later, breast milk comes in. I have no baby to give it to. 3 days later, or maybe even the same day, I find myself in a funeral home, planning a baby's funeral. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know they made baby caskets. I didn't know they made baby headstones. I didn't know there was a place in a cemetery specifically for babies. Like, I didn't. So again, I'm in shock. This is so foreign. Like, I like to be in my comfort zone. I like to know my surroundings. And when you go through a traumatic event, and then everything is just, it's like something new every day. And so the money that we had saved for our baby, we're putting towards his funeral. And, there's baby blue caskets for boys, and
Oh my goodness.
and pink for girls. And they're, I don't know, 15
Of
inches
course,
or
very
whatever.
small, probably.
Right. Very. And, they have this binder, you flip through headstones, and which one would you like? And it's just,
Oh, wow, really? Oh,
yeah,
wow. It's like
yeah.
literally you're
And
shopping now. You're shopping
it,
for the
right,
headstone and the casket and what
right.
color and what
It was,
size.
and
I'm so
again,
sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go
you're
through
just, yeah. At that point, I was not, I didn't have time to cry.
this.
I
Yeah.
had to plan. I had to do this. And I think that's anytime someone loses a loved one, all of a sudden you go into this mode of got to plan the funeral. And it's not till later on that you're actually able to grieve. So we did do a graveside cemetery, and I did go on maternity leave. Obviously, I had delivered a baby. I took a 6-week maternity leave. During that time, I actually moved in with my parents. I drove across state and stayed with them because obviously I'm not working. I don't want to be home by myself. So my husband agreed. He's like, I totally get it. I don't want you being home by yourself either. All I'm going to do is be depressed, and you don't want to be depressed by yourself. So I lived with them for about 6 weeks. During that time, the doctor did call me and said that what had happened was the umbilical cord, it did not wrap around his neck, but it was like a shoelace knot. It was just a knot in the cord. They call it a true knot. And then there's false knots, the things we learn, right? A false knot is a kink in the umbilical cord. A true knot is an actual, like I said, a shoelace knot.
So the baby had somehow managed to go
Yeah, it
through its
just,
own.
it wasn't around his head. It was just the fact the cord had, intertwined and somehow
And
knotted
those
itself.
and those hiccups, now that I'm thinking, those hiccups could be, you never know what those hiccups were.
Right, right. And you try to analyze it and be like, was that the last time he was breathing? Was that when it would, it just, so much goes through your mind. And part of me was like, well, I'm glad it wasn't necessarily something wrong with me that caused it. But then again, it didn't make me feel any better, because they do blood work, they try to figure out, everything. So I went back to work after maternity leave. So then I'm back at the office. So 6 weeks later, I still haven't really grieved. I'm still just going through the motions, and I go back to work, and I have to clock in 8 to 5 and turn in my reports and do my project. When people come up to you that,
Say
like,
congratulations.
yes, like, now of course my coworkers knew, but you have the mailman, you have the post, or the UPS man, waitresses that we had gone to, we tend to go to the same restaurants, and people recognize you at the grocery store. And that's I heard congratulations about 5 times within the first week of coming back. And what do you say when someone comes up to me? Oh, wow,
Yes,
congratulations, you
you
had
had
a
a baby.
baby. And
Yeah.
again, I'm in my young 20s. What do you say?
Mm.
And at first, I did not like to say my baby died, because I think saying the word died is
Mm.
such a strong word.
Mm.
So I would always say, oh, he passed, because
Mm.
it softened it.
Mm.
And I would be like, oh, he passed away. And then they immediately, like, their demeanor, then what do they say? Because they're embarrassed. Like, it
They're
was
embar-
so,
mm. They're
and
embarrassed and they're in shock now.
yeah,
Uh,
so I just, and then I just go back to my desk and sit there, and stare at my stapler and wait till 5 o'clock. And I don't know if I was productive at all at work the first month.
numbs
It's
you.
all a blur. It does. You're just clock in, clock out, go home, and try to live your life. Life moves on,
It's
right?
like what I feel is like right now when I'm listening to your story and we practically live other people's stories when we listen to them. Life becomes surreal. It looks like as if it's a dream. You're like maybe 1 minute,
Yes.
one other minute you'll just wake up and it's not true.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know many people have said that when they experience, is it called disassociation or something like
Mm.
that, where right,
Mm.
you kind
You
of
dissociate.
separate yourself. Yes. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, got to move on. Don't have time to grieve. Don't have time to do this.
Mm.
Got to go to the bank. Got to go grocery shopping. Got to do this. And in the meantime, I struggled with sleep. So insomnia got really bad, because every time I closed my eyes, I replay that day. I
Mm.
replay the black circle on the ultrasound where there's no heartbeat. Every single time I close my eyes, even for 2 seconds, it just flashes in your head. In the meantime, I did decide, well, let's have another baby. So somewhere within when the funeral happened and I was able to try and have another baby, all the insomnia there. I did get pregnant got pregnant again
Was
within the first month of trying, but that made the insomnia worse, because now I'm carrying another child and fearful something's going to happen to him again, or something's going to happen to him.
mm.
So, and I think that happens with any women, baby
Mm.
loss, miscarriage. Instead of saying, oh, yay, I'm pregnant, it's, oh, yeah, I'm pregnant. Oh my gosh. And then they're fearful for
Yeah.
how they
And
leave,
because
because,
in your case, there was no cause that we could see, no apparent cause. So there was
mhm,
nothing even you could do to prevent it.
right,
Like if you fell down last time, or if you ate something
right,
last time,
right.
or if your blood pressure shot up last time. So this time, okay, you need to be careful,
Mhm.
take care of that. But there is nothing you can do right now.
Right. So in my mind, anything can happen.
Yeah.
Anything. So yeah, the insomnia went on for another however long. Well, I did deliver him. He is now 17. So the whole time I was pregnant, up until the day he was delivered, I had insomnia. So then I'm still trying to go to work. I hadn't slept in, I don't know. I don't even know how I was doing it, to be quite
You
honest. I
were
was
just
going
probably
through the motion.
you were just probably trying to also make sure that the baby is moving. I think
Right. Oh, and
that's
that's
what would
something.
be happening.
Right.
You're
And that's
just
something the doctor said. He said, make sure you feel him every day. And I do remember there was one day I was probably 6, 7 months pregnant, and I was at my mother-in-law's house. And I started thinking, and I'm like, I haven't felt him move all day. And by this, it was like three or four in the afternoon. And I just got this immediate anxiety
mm,
and started crying. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is it. Like, something's happening. I
mm,
drank orange juice and found some spicy, you're doing anything you can to make the baby move. And that was a very fearful day. And I just was convinced something had happened to him. And get home, get ready for bed,
Mhm.
and he kicked. And I'm like,
Thank God.
I could breathe. I did
Mhm.
not breathe that day. I didn't, my heart was racing that whole day. So yeah, you're hyper aware. You're already hyper aware, fearful. Okay, baby's got to move every day. Baby's got to move every day. I didn't convince, but my doctor agreed, we will induce this one at 38 weeks. I don't want you to have to wait full term,
Mhm.
because in my mind, I'm like, as soon as he's able to come out of my body, I want him out and healthy. I don't want to carry
Mhm.
him any longer than I need to.
Mhm.
So even when my child, who I delivered healthy, at his 1 year birthday, still having insomnia, you still play that day back. The fear had gone, but I did have anger, because you ask God, if you believe in God, why did this happen? I'm
Why
so mad
me?
at you. Like, why me? So I was I
Mhm.
say a little angry because my anger got worse over the years. So that was the beginning of being angry. I think that's even, part of the beginning stages of grief is you have anger.
Mhm.
And so when my son turned 1, that's when the depression hit.
Mhm.
And we don't know why we have delayed grief. Nobody, it's just something might happen. And then all of a sudden, that's when the dark
And
depression.
that is what is important for people to know. And that's why this story is very important. Depression, grief can be very prolonged,
Mhm.
even with miscarriages and stillbirths. We tend to associate grief with death of a loved one, a living loved one, right? Somebody loses a living child, a living parent, a living grandparent, and okay, we're saying you're grieving now, and people are coming and hugging you, and they think, okay, it's gonna last because they're going to miss this other person who was in their life.
Mhm.
But with a child who was not there, you know, we don't comprehend. Like, for example, I never went through it, so I never understood the fact that a mom who lost a child who was not born, they're still missing them too. And so
Mhm.
they're still in that, the different stages as you talked about. The first is the shock, and then the
Mhm.
denial, and then that's when the anger, resentment hits in, finally depression.
Mhm.
And this can vary, this stage. So if your woman is depressed even 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I mean, I know families who give up on their woman in 3, 4 months. They want
Mhm.
them to just forget it and let it go and move on and live their life normally. Even people like us, friends or people who haven't gone through it, we never pay attention, and that's why the story is important.
Mhm.
Because, like, when I heard your story the first time, it just took me to, oh my goodness, what would my mother have felt when she
Mhm.
lost 3 babies before me? And what would my sister have felt? I don't remember calling my sister 1 or 2 times after she lost the baby, and then she had the DNC. Oh, I'm sorry it happened, just talk to her. And she cried once. And I do not think I ever followed up with her to see how she was doing, say, a few weeks later or a few months later, or even today.
Mhm.
It never occurred to me to ask her if she ever missed that baby. Or I really hope after watching this, they understand that, and then they go back to the women in their lives and just hug them
Mhm.
for their sacrifices. It's literally, when in the start I talked about losing a limb, a part of your body after a road traffic accident, or losing a loved one after, say, an earthquake, like right now we had in Turkey, or we have floods coming around, or we have, hurricanes or other things. So it's similar.
Mhm.
We're losing a part of our body, and we're losing a loved one.
Mhm. And I think sometimes because we're going through the motions, we're in survival mode, I think people see us on the outside that we're doing fine. And that's why we don't always know when someone's depressed, because on the outside they look completely fine. On the inside, they're breaking, and you
And
know,
that
um,
also because that's what the society expects. People want you to look fine. You know, if after 5 months you don't look fine, people will start thinking, oh, you need help. You need to do something about it. You know, it's not right. They start labeling you that there's something wrong with you. Why are you still grieving 5 months or even a year after the incident?
Yeah, it's interesting that you just said labeling themselves. I forgot to mention I had labeled myself as the girl whose baby died. And I also had paranoia during the time, which I didn't mention earlier. You know, you do, it was such a vulnerable thing. And I felt like the whole world knew, not that it was a secret, but like they knew this event that had happened. And I remember driving on the highway, envisioning every single car that I passed, the driver just looking at me with sad eyes. There goes the girl whose baby died. In the grocery store, from behind me, the person in the checkout line, they just stared at the back of my head. Oh, there goes the poor girl. It was all in my mind. I'm sure it was the grief and the anger and the depression and the insomnia and the fear all, you know, messing with my head. But I did label myself, and it did become, you know, paranoia. And at that point, I was like, maybe I need help. Because not only did the depression hit where I started crying more, you know, and my husband, it had been about a year or so because my son was now a year, and that's when the depression hit. And I remember him saying, you know, you have a choice to be happy, like, you know, get up and be happy. But I think it's because he didn't know my depression was delayed. You know, he thought, okay, we were upset when it happened. We now have
Another
new,
baby. And so just be happy.
and now we're happy. And so I don't think and I didn't know, I didn't understand that it was delayed, because we just don't, again, I'm in my young 20s. I don't even know that there's different stages of grief. Like I had to talk to a counselor first, of course, before you can be put on medication. So she was the first person I shared I wrote it out. I'm like writing a book report. Every single detail of my story, I read it to her. And I remember her being so compassionate and so understanding. And that was the first time I had an outlet. And so she said, you know, let me get you set up with a psychiatrist. And I went in there, and I remember him looking at me saying, or I asked him, I said, I had brought my paper, like my report. I said, do you want me to tell you my story? And this was his response. I'll never forget it. 17 years ago. Oh, I know your story. Your baby died. Your eyes are set back. Are you anorexic? What? And that's where you have this surreal moment. Like, is this happening? Like, and at that point too, I had suicidal ideation. So here I am at a psychiatrist, suicidal ideation, depression, fear, anger. And the first words out of his mouth are, I know your baby died. Your eyes are set back. Are you anorexic? Oh, I did not like him. I did not like him. I got my antidepressants and I said, thank you. I hated every time I had to go see him. I also didn't know at that age, I'm learning all these things clearly. I didn't know you could change doctors. Like, because, you know, growing up, you have the same pediatrician and you have the same dentist, and you know, I didn't know as a patient, I had that option. So I had anxiety every time I had to go see him. And you know,
it never occurred to you to just tell your counselor that, can we change him? Can we have another doctor? You know, it didn't.
You know, every time I went to go see the counselor, I'm more into filling out the sheet with the scale on a 1 to 10. How's your sleep? On a 1 to 10, have you had any? I'm more about the scale than to be
procedure,
like
the process.
Right. And at that time, I wasn't as outspoken. I was kind of introverted to where I didn't even know to speak up and say, hey, do you have another doctor? Like, you're
You're
just
at
going
a
through the
you were
motions.
at a position that even an extrovert would become an introvert.
Right,
You see,
right.
like you were being treated just like an object who had to
Mm,
go through this process and get this medication and have a diagnosis. And that's very unfortunate. It still happens, in hospitals. You're just somebody who's gone in with an illness. They diagnose you, they label you, they give you your test, they give you your medication, and they don't have no time to listen to
really get to
you
know you.
or
Right,
know you
right.
or say that you're a human being and relate to
Right.
you and give you that respect
Hmm.
that you
Or at
need,
least to
that
say,
compassion at
hey,
least.
right. Or for him to at least say, I'm sorry you had to go through.
Mm,
I mean, there was, and back when this happened, 2005, 2006, there weren't support groups like there are now. And
mm,
I do remember the doctor when I was at the hospital and I had delivered my stillborn baby. I do remember him saying, we do have a grief counselor here at the hospital, and we do have a support group for women in your situation.
mm,
But at the time when everything's going on, I have to plan a funeral. The last thing I wanted to do was to be in I mean, this was my view on support groups. I'm like, what, are we going to all sit around in a circle and
mm.
introduce ourselves and cry together because we just lost a baby? Like, who wants to do that? Like, that was
And that's what they
and
show in movies. That's true. That's
right,
exactly how they show it.
right. Am I going to have to stand up and say, hi, my name is Heather. I just delivered a stillborn baby? Like,
Mm,
I didn't want to do that.
mm.
And but I also didn't think about it the year or two later. It never dawned on me, well, maybe I should go to a support group, because at that point life had moved on. I'm now seeing a psychiatrist. It didn't even dawn on me.
Mm,
And now I have taken Grief Share, which is a
mm.
support group. Healing is a Choice as an older adult now. And I think you have to be ready for that support. Don't go to support groups if you're not in the right headspace. So I had to wait, and it had been probably 15 years
Yeah,
till I
because
actually.
you feel you've been put in that spotlight, and you don't
Mhm.
want to be. I mean, that's the time when
Oh
you're
yeah.
actually hiding. You
Hmm.
want to run away. You don't want that attention.
Right. I don't want
Yeah.
all eyes on me like it was in the hospital room where everyone was staring at me. I'm like, I don't want that. So I got put on antidepressants, suicidal ideation. I had had the same reoccurring thought for about a year. It played in my mind, and then that's when I went to the psychiatrist. So your head can definitely mess with you, and it was something that replayed in my mind of how I felt like I was going crazy. And I think that's what it was, where I wanted to make it stop. Like, I want to not feel the way I'm feeling. And I think that's why some people have like suicidal ideation, because they just want to make their life stop. Like,
It's those racing thoughts, it's those racing
right.
thoughts. And that's why you're not able to sleep because
Hmm.
you're just reliving. I don't know, you're reliving what happened, or you're reliving what he said, she said, or what you see, or so whatever you go through, you're just reliving it in your head, and it's
And
very
at
hard.
that point, and at that point, my depression was really bad. And I
Mm,
wasn't anorexic, but I probably wasn't eating good. I mean, I'll admit that I was underweight,
mm,
but rightfully so. I mean, when you think about it, and so with the anger, the depression, I did have fear that something would happen to my now rainbow baby. Anytime he would fall and hurt himself, I immediately, get these triggers of, oh my gosh, something's going to happen to him. So I'm always like in hyperdrive with that.
mm, mm,
And I didn't have the healthiest marriage. There was a lot of things going on. Um, but we did end up, I filed for divorce, and there were many reasons, but I do know that my depression didn't help the situation. My anger with God, anger with, not knowing answers, and why did this happen? And so
and
I
he
did file.
probably not knowing how to handle you.
Right,
Men,
right.
yeah,
He just
men.
sees, okay, what happened to the wife that I used to know? Like, what happened to you?
Mm,
And my depression then turned into like hardcore anger. I was so angry at the whole world, and that does come across in your attitude. And then you don't want to spend time with your spouse, and he's wanting to know what in the world's going on. And like I said, there were other things going on in our marriage as well. And I knew the marriage wasn't healthy.
And then you just broke. Everything
I
broke.
did. I did.
Everything broke away.
At that point, I had cried so many tears that even when I said I want a divorce, I showed no emotion. Like I had just emotionally checked out of the world. I had cried so many tears, I didn't have any more tears to shed. And he even made a remark of how stoic or how cold I looked. And it was just the fact I had had so much going on in my head that there comes a point where it's just,
You don't
you're
care.
like, you're like a
I
robot.
don't care. Leave me alone.
Yeah,
Just leave me alone.
right. I was, what's the word? Is it apathetic, or where you just kind of
Apathy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you become indifferent, where you don't feel anything.
Right. And I didn't feel anything. And that's exactly how it was. And so I did get divorced, and then I'm going through divorce grief. It doesn't matter if you're happy with, I don't want to say anybody's happy they got divorced, but sometimes it's good for people to get out of an unhealthy marriage. So even if
There's
they
this uncertainty, like
right,
will always hit you, even if you're happy, even if it's a bad
right,
marriage and you left it, but there will always be this uncertainty. Now what?
right. And so even if you're, I'm happy I got out of this marriage, I'm going to build a better life, you still go through a point of loss of identity. All of a sudden I was a single parent. Now I got to go through the challenges of being a single parent, or, finances. Now I'm a one income family. So you still have these factors. So there was not necessarily divorce depression, but it was a whole nother life that was foreign to me. Plus I still had the depression. So I'm going through this big ball of emotion, even as a single mom, who went through a divorce. So that's when it all catches up. And then I broke. So there's always a point where you break, you hit your rock bottom. And my son, who I delivered and he was healthy, it was about when he was 5 or 6. So we're talking 7 years, 6 years from my stillborn baby to when I finally broke. And sometimes it does take years till you hit that rock bottom and you're like, what is happening? Like, this is my life. Like, this is my life. And at that point, I did start looking for a church home because something was missing. I couldn't explain it, but it was like I was traveling this world on my own. And it was like I was waving the white flag, surrendering, saying, I don't know what I'm doing. My son would have a temper tantrum in the grocery store. I'm already sad because now I'm divorced and I'm still depression, and people
you're
are staring
worried and
at me.
anxious. Yeah.
I got
It's the
all eyes
past
on
and the future, both. Now the past and the
Yes.
future, both are there.
Yes. And so I did hit rock bottom, and ended up going to support group. I actually went to Divorce Care, which is a support group that's offered in churches nationwide for people who are
It
thinking
was
of getting
faith-based. It was
It is
faith-based.
faith-based, and it's for people that are thinking of getting a divorce, are divorced, or have been divorced but are still struggling emotionally. So I made myself go. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the church. It was completely foreign. And there I was. I was going to tell my story of stillborn baby, because that was part of why I was hitting rock bottom, And so here I am sitting in that circle.
And so from that day till today, the healing process.
Yeah.
Let's talk
So I
about that.
ended up, yes. So for 12 weeks, I went to the support group. Each week, there's a different topic: anger, loneliness, forgiveness. And I think through that, my heart softened, because we get so angry through our depression that we are like, I don't care about anything, I don't care about anyone. And I could tell over time, it's almost like I could physically feel my heart softening. It's like the anger started melting, and I found hope, which I had not had for 6, 7 years. And when you're living life with no hope, that's a dark, dark place. To have no purpose, no hope, and you're just going through the motions every day, living your life. Like I said, like you're a robot, you just go to work 8 to 5, come home, get kid ready, get kid on bus, come home, blah, 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 do it again the next day. And so through that support group, I did find hope, which came from God and from the support group. And at that point, I was like, I think I want to go back to church. And the fact that I had been angry, me and God had not been on speaking terms for those 7 years. So for me to humble myself and want to go back to church, even though I had been so angry as to why did you dangle this baby in front of me and tease me and then take him away from me? I don't flip people off, but in my mind, I was flipping him off and rolling my eyes at him. And so for me to surrender and be like, I have to do something, so through that
Only
support.
you who can do something. Yeah, it's only you who can do something.
Right.
I mean,
And
you
so
took him away, you gave me this pain, and now you're the only one who can take this pain away because I do not have control over this.
So from the time I found a church to now, it was where I have found healing is I took divorce care again, because sometimes we have to take things twice. Because sometimes the first time you're going through the motions, it does, you take it a second time, you're like, oh, I didn't get that the first time. So I did do that twice. I did do grief share, which was more, yes, for when a loved one has passed away. And again, each week is a different, depression, loneliness. So it's similar, similar topics. And that was another support group. It was in a home setting, a very comfortable, you're not like in a classroom. And I also took healing as a choice. So I threw myself into these support groups at this church, which I still go to this church. It's been about 11 years. This church offers all these classes. And I think the more I told my story, that's kind of where I found the healing. And that's why I'm able to be here today and share my story, because I can see how much I've healed from it just by sharing. Now I'm able to tell my story and not be crying and not be getting choked up. And, like I said, it's been like my son now is 17. So we're talking 18 years ago this happened. And literally within just the last year or so, I have finally found healing where, I can encourage others and be like, if all these support classes were around back then, and I have been invited to these support groups. So if I had had a friend who said, hey, here's a support group, I'll drive you there. Maybe my life would have been different if I had, taken grief share
earlier,
15 years ago, like who knows, but, I do think we have to be vulnerable to find healing.
and it happens with time, everything is set, I being a believer myself, we do know like that God does create our destiny, our fate, and our job is just to move towards it, not knowing what it is and just accepting whatever comes in the way. He's taught us the good and the bad, and now we have the choice. So we're heading, trying to get somewhere, get to a better point, make a better life, have a good life, and just do the right thing and wait for things to happen, wait for things to just, fall in place. That's all you have to do.
And so, from the single mom who was breaking down with a 4-year-old, I'm now remarried. I have 4 kids.
Oh, very good.
That includes 2
nice.
stepdaughters who are now in college. One's an ambulance driver, one's a pharmacy technician. I have my 17-year-old and I have a 7-year-old. And we are, a God-centered family, and, we have support with each other. I have access to support groups. So you have that, you know, that community and
Yeah.
that support. And, I've come a long way from that single mom
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
4-year-old who's hitting rock bottom, to see what happens when we do heal, and to know
Yeah.
that life isn't always going to be that way. And that was something
Yeah.
that I told I'm always going to be labeled as this person, or I'm
Yeah.
always going to have fear, or always have, paranoia. Well, it doesn't have to be that way if we choose. Something else I thought of real quick was, we also don't want to compare our stories. Or, like, I always thought to myself, I'd rather have a miscarriage than a stillbirth. Or I've known people that had miscarriages, and in my mind I'm like, well, at least you didn't have a stillborn. But
Yeah.
it's a
No. Yeah.
bad attitude to have. I don't think that way
Yeah.
anymore. But it doesn't make their grief any less. And
Yeah.
in my mind, it was this comparing thing. So we just,
I have
that's
it
something
worse. I got it
I
worse. Yes.
right.
My pain
And
is more valid because I got it worse than you. Yes.
right. And that's something I've learned, in the last 15 years of this whole journey, is just because they haven't walked in your shoes doesn't mean that they're not hurting. Or just because they didn't go through the same situation, like, it doesn't mean that they're any less sad. Or, so, we just have to be really careful, especially as women, with baby loss of any sort, to just be there for each other, and not, you know, well, at least you didn't have to do this, or at least you didn't have to do that, because that's not even the attitude that we should have,
Yeah.
towards each other.
Yeah.
So,
It's just compassion, I think. It's not even
mhm,
you're expecting somebody to, feel sorry for you. It's just all you want is compassion and understanding. That's it.
mhm.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much for sharing the story. I really do hope people listen to this and learn something from this, and we start giving people their due, share of compassion. Just be kind to each other. And even when they're in their dark areas of, in their dark moods or dark areas, instead of kind of blaming them or putting labels on them or saying, oh, she just got an attitude issue, anger issue, so just leave it, or she's just too sensitive, let her cry, and unfortunately, that's what we do with men as well, and we start labeling people, life is a journey. We're all
Yes.
growing,
Mhm,
and we must give each other that opportunity to grow. If I would have learned something from my mother's story, I would not have had the journey I did. But we don't do
mhm,
that.
mhm,
We don't, but
mhm.
so we have to live that journey. We all have to go through some kind of pain, we have to carve our own path.
And hopefully learn some things all along the way.
And it's sad, like we have to experience it to learn it,
Mhm.
only if we could learn from others people's story. But yeah, thank you so much, Heather.
Oh,
Any
absolutely.
last
It's been a
any
pleasure.
last few words before we close here?
You
Any
know, I
closing words?
yeah, I don't do this for money. I don't, I just want to share my story to encourage other people, whether it is a stillborn baby loss, or even just fighting through depression, and feelings of going through, this, like you said, darkness. you know um Always reach out to somebody. That's why they always say, if even if you're having suicidal ideation, just talk to somebody. And we don't have to live this life alone and by ourselves, which is something I thought I was doing. But so I just want to encourage
Go
others that
out
if
and
you are
help. Get
struggling
the
with
help.
depression,
Get the help.
even if it's call a friend. And if it hadn't been me
Mm,
calling my friend, I would never have been in that support
mm,
group.
mm.
So I just want to encourage, anybody struggling like that, to just reach out. And I hope
Yeah.
today was encouraging. So
All right. Everybody take care. We will be joining next month with another beautiful story, another tale of endurance. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.